The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. Fiora Esposito noticed it the way she noticed most things. Late, and with the particular irritation of someone whose attention was entirely elsewhere. She had been elbow-deep in a surgical report when her mother called, voice pitched at that specific frequency that meant something had happened, something irrevocable, something that smelled of her father's cigarettes and old debts. "Come home," her mother said. Nothing else. Fiora pressed her phone against her shoulder and looked around her office at the University Hospital of Palermo, at the framed diplomas on the wall, at the stack of patient files on the corner of her desk that would not sort themselves, at the small potted rosemary plant on the windowsill, the only living thing she had managed to keep alive in 3 years of post-residency practice, and even that looked faintly accusatory. "I have rounds in an hour," she said. "Fiora." Her mother's voice cracked on the second syllable of her name. "Please." She went. The drive from the hospital to the Esposito family home in the hills above Palermo took 22 minutes. Fiora had timed it many times over the years, gauging exactly how long she could stay away before absence became insult. The house itself was beautiful, all pale stone and terracotta roof tiles, bougainvillea bleeding violet over the front gate, the kind of Mediterranean grandeur that photographed well and felt from the inside like a slow suffocation. Her father was waiting on the terrace. Don Carmine Esposito was a large man who had grown larger with age, his hair silver now, his hands still enormous and ringless, because he had always believed that jewellery on a man was vanity. He sat at the wrought iron table where he had conducted most of the significant business of Fiora's childhood, arguments, announcements, the occasional celebration, with a glass of marsala in front of him and the expression of someone who had already decided something and was only waiting for the formality of informing her. Her mother hovered in the doorway to the kitchen. That was telling. Her mother only hovered when she expected raised voices. "Sit down," her father said. "I'd rather stand." Fiora set her bag down on the terrace wall and crossed her arms. She was 31 years old and a practicing surgeon, and she had spent most of her adult life trying to build enough distance between herself and this house, this family, this world, that she could breathe freely. It had mostly worked. Mostly. "What's happened?" "Nothing has happened." Her father's tone was careful, the tone he used when he was managing her. "An arrangement has been made." The word arrangement landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. "What kind of arrangement?" She said it slowly, carefully, the way she spoke to patients when she was about to deliver a diagnosis. Don Carmine Esposito took a long drink of marsala. Then he set the glass down and looked at his daughter with the eyes of a man who had survived 30 years in the Cosa Nostra by always knowing which battles he could not win. "The Falcone family," he said, "have proposed a union." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Fiora counted them. "No," she said. "Fiora, no." She uncrossed her arms. Her voice was very steady. She had learned steadiness in operating theatres, in corridors where bad news had to be delivered, in all the places where panic was a luxury no one could afford. "I don't care what's been arranged, or by whom, or why. I am not property to be traded between families. I am a doctor. I have a career. I have a life. I have—" "You have a family," her father said quietly. and your family is in debt." That stopped her. Don Carmine didn't say the word debt lightly. He didn't say it at all as a rule. The fact that he had said it now, in that careful voice, told Fiora more than she wanted to know. She sat down. The story came out in pieces, the way all terrible things do, not in one catastrophic revelation, but in a slow erosion, detail by detail. The Esposito family's position within the Cosa Nostra had been weakening for years. Trade routes compromised, a trusted lieutenant who had turned informant, a business venture in Catania that had gone catastrophically wrong, debts to the Lombardi clan in Naples that her father had been servicing with borrowed time. And now the Falcones, the oldest and most powerful family in Palermo's underworld, had offered a solution. "Who is he?" Fiora asked. Her voice had gone very quiet. "Nero Falcone." Her father spoke the name with something that might have been reverence or might have been fear. In the circles her father moved in, those feelings were often indistinguishable. "The eldest son. He has been away, in America, in Milan, running the family's legitimate enterprises. He returned to Palermo 8 months ago to take over from his uncle after the old Don's health declined. I don't know him. No one knows him well." Her father's fingers moved on the stem of his glass. "He is private, controlled. They say he is nothing like his father." "His father is dead?" "Yes." "How?" A pause. "That is not something I know with certainty." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Fiora felt it settle into the space between them and did not press it. There were some questions in this family that had always been better left unasked. "What happens," she said instead, "if I refuse?" Her father looked at her. His eyes were tired in a way she hadn't noticed before, tired in a way that went deeper than sleeplessness, the tiredness of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "The Lombardi debt comes due in 60 days, he said. "If it is not settled, your brother Marco's territory in the east of the city will be absorbed. Marco himself will—" He stopped, started again. "There are consequences, Fiora, for the family, for Marco." She heard what her father was not saying. Marco, who was 24 years old and hot-tempered, and had already survived 2 attempts on his life that Fiora only knew about because she'd stitched him up herself in her kitchen at 3 in the morning without asking questions. Marco, who was her father's heir and her mother's heartbreak, and the one person in this family Fiora could not stop loving, no matter how hard she tried. She stood up. "I want to meet him," she said, "before I agree to anything. I want to meet Nero Falcone." Her father nodded slowly. "That can be arranged. And I want to make something clear." She picked up her bag. Her hands were absolutely steady. "I will not give up my practice. I will not become a decoration. Whatever this arrangement is, I remain a doctor. That is not negotiable." Don Carmine looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he said, very softly, "He asked about you, you know, before the proposal was made. He had you looked into." Fiora went still. "What did he find?" "Everything." Her father's voice held something she could not quite name. "He knows exactly who you are." She left without another word. On the drive back to the hospital, she kept both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road, and told herself very firmly that whatever Nero Falcone knew about her, she would learn twice as much about him before they met. She was still telling herself this at 2 in the morning, lying awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, while something cold and certain began to take shape in the centre of her chest. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number, a single message. Saturday, 7 o'clock, the Falcone estate. I will send a car. She did not respond, but she did not sleep either. The car was black, the driver silent, and the route was one Fiora had never taken. She had dressed carefully and with deliberate defiance. A deep burgundy dress that was elegant but not soft, heels she could walk in quickly if she needed to, her dark hair up in a knot that said professional and not available. She wore no jewellery except the small gold stud earrings her grandmother had given her on the day she graduated from medical school, which she wore on every important occasion because they reminded her of who she was when everything else felt uncertain. The Falcone estate was 40 minutes outside Palermo, up into the hills where the road curved along the ridge and the city spread out below like spilled light. She had known it existed. Everyone in certain circles knew it existed, but she had never seen it. It revealed itself slowly, the way powerful things often do. First the high walls, then the iron gates, then the sweep of the private road lined with cypress trees that stood like sentinels in the headlights. The house itself was enormous. Old stone, 3 stories, with a long facade of arched windows that were lit from within, golden and warm against the October dark. A fountain in the courtyard, guards, she counted 4, positioned with the casual precision of men who had done this so many times it had become muscle memory. She noticed all of it. She was a woman who had grown up in the margins of this world. She had learned young to observe. A man she didn't recognize met her at the door, late 50s, impeccably dressed, with the air of someone who had run a household like this for decades. He introduced himself as Luca and led her through a marble-floored entrance hall, past paintings she didn't have time to look at properly, up a staircase, through a corridor that smelled faintly of wood smoke and something green and cool, like a garden after rain. He opened a door. "The Don will be with you shortly," he said, and left her. The room was a library, floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, the books arranged with obvious care, spines aligned, categories grouped, here and there a space where something had been recently removed and not yet returned. A fire in a stone hearth, 2 chairs angled toward it, a low table between them. A decanter of something amber on a sideboard. French doors at the far end, open despite the October chill, leading to a stone balcony where the lights of Palermo were strung across the dark valley like a second constellation. Fiora walked to the balcony doors and stood looking out. She would not sit, would not pour herself a drink, would not make herself comfortable in a room that belonged to him. Small acts of resistance were still acts of resistance. She heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps. Those were quiet, almost eerily so for a large man. What she heard was the change in the room itself, a quality of attention that shifted, the air that rearranged itself around a new gravitational centre. "Dr. Esposito." His voice was low, unhurried, with the particular texture of someone who had learned early that raising your voice was unnecessary when everyone in the room was already listening. She turned around. Nero Falcone was not what she had expected, and she had expected something specific. Her father's generation, the older Don type, heavy with authority and age. But the man standing in the doorway of his own library was perhaps 35, no more. Tall, dark-suited, the jacket cut close, a white shirt open at the collar in the only concession to informality. His face was angular and serious, strong jaw, a nose that had been broken once and set slightly imperfect, dark eyes under darker brows that were watching her with an attention so complete and so still that it felt, for just a moment, like being examined under very good light. "Falcone," she said. Not Don Falcone. She would not give him that. Not yet. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the recognition of a small move in a large game. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the chairs by the fire. "Sit." "I prefer to stand." She had said the same thing to her father 3 days ago. It felt important to establish the pattern early. He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses without asking her preference, brought both to her. She took hers because refusing felt childish, and Nero Falcone did not look like a man who would be impressed by childishness. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Neither are you." She sipped. The whiskey was extraordinary. She kept her expression neutral. "My father tells me you had me investigated." "I did." She waited for the apology or the qualification. Neither came. He said it the way someone states weather, a simple fact. "And?" she said. "And you are exactly who your file says you are." He studied her over the rim of his glass. "Board-certified general surgeon, top of your class at the University of Bologna, fellowship at Johns Hopkins, returned to Palermo 3 years ago, which surprised everyone who knew your trajectory. You work emergency cases no one else wants. You keep your professional and personal lives entirely separate. You haven't been in a serious relationship in 4 years. A pause that was precisely calibrated. "You hate this world." "Yes," she said. "No point in pretending otherwise." "I do." "Then we have something in common," he said quietly. And something in the way he said it made her look at him more carefully than she had been. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't immediately name. Not coldness, exactly, though coldness was there. Not calculation, though that was there too. It was the look of someone carrying a heavy thing with such practiced composure that only someone trained to look for hidden load-bearing structures would notice the strain. She was a doctor. She noticed. "Tell me about this arrangement," she said. He moved to the fireplace, set one hand on the stone mantel, and looked into the fire. In profile he was sharper, the planes of his face more severe. "Your family needs protection," he said. "Mine needs legitimacy. A marriage between our families would satisfy both." Legitimacy. The word felt ugly in her mouth. "You mean that having a surgeon as a wife makes the Falcone name appear— It makes it appear to be what it will shortly become," he said, and now there was something almost sharp in his voice, something she hadn't heard before. He turned from the fire and looked at her directly. "I am not my uncle, Dr. Esposito. I am not my father. What I am building here is something different, something that will not look, in 5 years, like what it looks like now." She stared at him. "You're telling me you intend to go legitimate?" "I'm telling you that the word legitimate is more complicated than you understand. I'm a surgeon. I spend my life with complicated. The corner of his mouth moved again, closer to a smile this time, but not quite. I know. They stood in silence for a moment. The fire crackled. Below the balcony, Palermo glittered in the dark. I want specific terms, Fiora said, in writing. I keep my practice. I keep my apartment. I am consulted on anything that affects my life directly, and I want— She stopped, steadied herself. I want my family protected. Marco specifically. Whatever debts my father owes to whoever, I want them dissolved as part of this agreement. Done. She blinked. She had expected negotiation. Nero Falcone was watching her with that absolute, unsettling stillness. I will also require specific things from you, he said. Your presence at family events. Your engagement with those in my circle who will need to believe this marriage is real, and your discretion. His voice was very measured. There are things in my life that cannot leave this estate. Can you accept that? Discretion runs in both directions, she said. Yes, he agreed. It does. She looked at him across the firelit room, this man who was, apparently, to be her husband, and tried to find something to hold on to, some category she could put him in, some framework for understanding what she was about to do. She found nothing that fit neatly. He was not what she expected. That was the only fixed point she had. All right, she said. And then, because she believed in calling things what they were, I'll marry you. He raised his glass, very slightly. The gesture was so contained, it was almost not a gesture at all. Good, he said. She left an hour later, having discussed nothing further. On the drive back down the hill, she sat in the dark of the car and pressed her fingers against her lips and thought about the way his eyes had moved to her hands when she talked, watching them the way she watched hands, looking for what they revealed. She thought about the thing she'd seen in his face when he said, I am not my uncle. And she thought, for the first time since the telegram, that this situation might be more complicated and more dangerous than even she had understood. The wedding was scheduled for 6 weeks from the night of their meeting. 6 weeks was, apparently, long enough to arrange a Cosa Nostra alliance and short enough to prevent anyone from losing their nerve. Fiora spent the first week in a state she recognized clinically as dissociation, going through the motions of her hospital shifts with complete professional competence, while some separate part of her mind simply refused to process what was happening. She operated, she wrote notes, she attended a Tuesday morning case conference and contributed intelligently to a discussion about post-operative sepsis protocols. She came home to her apartment in the evenings and sat on the floor with her back against the sofa and did not answer calls. The terms arrived on a Thursday, delivered by hand, a folder of papers dense with legal language, accompanied by a note in a handwriting she recognized immediately as deliberate, controlled like its owner. Sharp, angular letters, no flourishes. Read everything. Change anything you need to. N.F. Asterisk. She read everything. The prenuptial agreement was the most comprehensive document she had ever encountered outside of a hospital contract. Her practice was protected in perpetuity. Her assets were entirely separate. A monthly sum, staggeringly large, which she planned to redirect immediately into the hospital's underfunded paediatric ward, would be deposited to an account in her name. She retained the right to maintain separate residence at her current apartment, while also having access to the Falcone estate and a dedicated suite within it. The section she read 3 times was the one titled Duration and Dissolution. The marriage, it stated, would be reviewed at the 3-year mark by mutual consent. She noted that reviewed was not the same as dissolved. She noted also that in the event of dissolution, the protections to the Esposito family remained in effect for 5 years post-separation. He was giving them a safety net, even if she left. She turned this fact over in her mind for a long time. She made 3 changes to the document, marked them in red pen, and sent it back with a note of her own. Agreed, with amendments, F.E. The amended document came back signed within 24 hours. She was sitting in the hospital cafeteria when it arrived, eating a sandwich she had no memory of purchasing, when her phone buzzed with a message from the unknown number that she had still not saved as a contact, because doing so would make this too real. The amendments are accepted. You will need to come to the estate on Sunday for photographs. For appearances. She stared at the message. Then she typed, "What kind of photographs?" The reply was almost instant. "The kind that establish a convincing engagement." "We're not engaged," she typed. "We're being married in 5 weeks." In our world, there is always an engagement, even a brief one. It will need to appear genuine. She looked around the cafeteria, at the tired nurses, the anxious families, the porter pushing a food trolley, the whole ordinary machinery of the hospital operating around her, and felt the distance between this world and the other one as a physical sensation, like standing on the edge of something high. "Fine," she wrote back. "Sunday. What time?" 11. The car will come." She did not respond. But that night she went to her wardrobe and spent a long time looking at her clothes, and called her friend Julia, who was a journalist and knew about things like photography and presentation, and who listened to the story Fiora told her, edited heavily, and said, "Fiora, who is this man?" "Someone I'm going to marry." Silence. Then, "The Falcones." Fiora said nothing. "Oh, cara," Julia said quietly. "Be careful." She knew. Of course she knew. Everyone in Palermo who had grown up adjacent to this world knew the names that mattered, even if they never spoke them aloud. It was the city's open secret, the architecture of power that held everything up, visible only when you looked at the things that stayed standing after everything else fell down. Sunday arrived. Fiora wore a dress the colour of winter olive trees, silver green, simple, with a neckline that was elegant without being a statement. She pulled her hair down because a woman who was genuinely in love with the man she was about to photograph with would not wear her professional armour to see him. Small performances were still performances. The photographer was a woman named Vera, small and efficient and clearly experienced at this specific kind of work, the work of making things appear true. She set up on the eastern terrace, where the morning light fell golden and the garden stretched down to a low stone wall overlooking the valley. Nero was already there when Fiora arrived. He was wearing a dark sweater instead of a suit, and the effect was disorienting in a way she hadn't anticipated. The formal clothes had been a kind of armour she could calibrate herself against. This was different. He looked, and she reached for the clinical word, the safe word, and couldn't find it in time. He looked like a person. Just a person, standing in morning light, his hair slightly dishevelled, holding 2 cups of coffee. He held one out to her. "You take it black," he said. She took the cup. "You had that looked up too?" "Your assistant mentioned it when I called the hospital last week." "You called my hospital?" "To confirm your schedule for the photograph session. I didn't want the office calling you at a bad time." He said it without inflection, as if this consideration were entirely unremarkable. "You were in surgery. Apparently a complicated case." "Appendectomy with complications," she said automatically. "Then you called my hospital." "I needed information." His eyes met hers, dark, level. "I got it. Does that bother you?" She thought about it, honestly. "I don't know yet," she said. The photograph session lasted 90 minutes. Vera directed them with quiet efficiency. Stand here, look there, his hand on your waist, now look at each other. And Fiora followed the directions with the same focused compliance she brought to situations that required her to trust someone else's expertise. What she did not anticipate was how natural it felt. Not natural in the sense of comfortable. She was acutely aware of his hand at the small of her back, the warmth of him when they stood close, the particular quality of stillness he carried that seemed to extend outward and settle over everything nearby, but natural in the sense of not forced. When Vera said look at him and Fiora looked, she found she didn't need to manufacture an expression because he was already looking at her in a way that created one. It was an assessing look, measuring, precise. But underneath the precision there was something else, something Fiora would have called, in a patient, the look of someone who does not quite believe in what they're seeing. As if she were an anomaly in an equation that had otherwise been solved. "Good," Vera said softly, and Fiora realized she had no idea what her own face had been doing. Afterward, when Vera had gone, they stood on the terrace with the remains of their coffee and the city spread below them in the noon light. "My family wants a dinner," Nero said, "before the wedding. A formal meeting, both families together." "Your family," she said. "Tell me who I'm meeting." "My aunt, Concetta. She is the one who matters. My cousin Enzo, who handles the financial side of our operations. He is manageable. 2 uncles, who are mostly ceremonial at this point." A pause. "And my brother." There was something in the way he said those last 3 words, a flatness. "What's his name?" she asked. "Dante." He said it, and nothing more. And Fiora, who had learned to hear what people weren't saying in the way they breathed after certain words, filed this away and asked nothing further. "All right," she said. "Dinner. When?" 2 weeks from today." He turned to look at her. In the daylight, he was even more striking, in a way that was almost architecturally severe. The bone structure was that precise, that unrelenting. Wear something that tells them you chose this. She looked at him. "Did I?" He held her gaze for 3 seconds exactly. Then, "You had options. Not good ones." "No," he agreed. "Not good ones." And something in his face changed. A small, fractional softening that was barely visible and might, she thought, have been the closest thing to honesty he'd offered her yet. "Neither did I." She took her coffee cup inside and set it on the sideboard, and picked up her bag and walked through the beautiful library and down the marble stairs and out through the courtyard, where the fountain played against the midday silence, and she sat in the car, and she breezed very carefully and evenly all the way back to the city. She thought about the way he'd said, "Neither did I." She thought about it for a long time. Aunt Concetta Falcone was 72 years old, wore black as a permanent state of being, and had the eyes of a woman who had spent decades watching men underestimate her and had found the experience educational rather than demoralizing. She arrived to the dinner table 30 seconds after Fiora, having clearly timed her entrance to assess the new woman before anyone else had the chance to frame her. She took in Fiora's dress, midnight blue, fitted, a small string of pearls at her throat, and her posture, straight, unhurried, exactly as comfortable as she chose to be, and the slight tilt of her chin that said, "I am aware of being evaluated, and I am not afraid of it." "So?" Concetta said, in Sicilian dialect, not Italian, a small test. "You're the doctor." "I am," Fiora said, in the same dialect. Her grandmother had spoken nothing else. Concetta's expression shifted by approximately 2 millimeters. Fiora suspected that was the equivalent, in this woman's emotional register, of a standing ovation. The dining room of the Falcone estate could seat 20. Tonight it seated 8, which made the long table feel both intimate and exposed, like a stage where you were always visible from every angle. Crystal and silver and white candles in tall holders, a centerpiece of late-season roses, dark red, almost burgundy. Staff moving silently at the periphery. Nero was already at the head of the table when Fiora arrived. He rose when she entered, a formality that surprised her by being unforced, and pulled out the chair to his right. She sat in it and arranged her napkin, and met the collective gaze of the Falcone family with the same expression she used when entering a difficult surgical consultation. Composed, attentive, absolutely impossible to read. Cousin Enzo was, as Nero had described, manageable. Mid-30s, handsome in a soft, indulged way, with the carefully maintained tan of someone who spent time in Monaco. He was charming in the practiced, surface-level manner of a man who had learned that charm was a useful business tool and had deployed it so frequently it had worn smooth. The two uncles, Salvatore and Benito, were indeed largely ceremonial. Old men with the air of former captains who had surrendered operational control, but retained their pride in the form of measured silences and occasional weighty pronouncements about the old ways. And then there was Dante. Fiora noticed him last, which she suspected was deliberate. He had positioned himself at the far end of the table, separated from the rest of the family by 2 empty chairs, his dark eyes moving around the room with a quality of attention that was entirely different from his brother's. Where Nero's stillness was controlled, a choice, a discipline, Dante's restlessness was barely contained. He was younger, perhaps 28, and less polished, with the handsome, slightly dangerous face of someone who had grown up in his brother's shadow and made recklessness his form of distinction. He watched Fiora throughout the first course with an interest that was not quite interest, more like assessment, more like, what are you, and what do you want? Your practice, Aunt Concetta said, addressing Fiora over a plate of sarde a beccafico, with the directness of someone who had no interest in preamble. At the university hospital. Yes. Emergency surgery, predominantly. That's right. And you intend to continue? Yes. Concetta considered this. Then,
My late husband suffered the cardiac event in 1987. The emergency surgeon who treated him was drunk and incompetent. He died. She said it completely without visible emotion. I have always had respect for surgeons who are competent. Fiora inclined her head. I try to be. Try, Dante said from the far end of the table, the first thing he had said all evening. Doctors say that, surgeons especially. I've always wondered if it's modesty or liability protection.
Every eye at the table moved to him. Nero's face did not change, but something in the set of his jaw tightened infinitesimally. A bit of both, usually, Fiora said pleasantly. Though in my case it's mostly accurate. Surgery is genuinely uncertain. You work with what you have, under the conditions you have. Outcomes are never entirely predictable. She paused. Rather like most things, I imagine. Dante looked at her steadily for a moment. Then something that was not quite hostile and not quite warm crossed his face. He said. Dante, Nero said. Just the one word, but something in his tone made his younger brother pick up his wineglass and examine it instead of continuing. The dinner proceeded. Fiora ate well and spoke when she was spoken to and asked questions that were intelligent and never personal. And she watched Nero Falcone manage his family with the particular skill of someone who had spent years learning exactly how much force was required to hold a specific thing together. It was a delicate engineering she saw. Concetta's pride, Enzo's vanity, the uncle's nostalgia, Dante's volatility, and he balanced it all with a composure that looked effortless and clearly was not. After the main course, Enzo leaned toward her with his carefully maintained smile. So, he said, how did you and Nero meet? The family story is quite vague. We were introduced by mutual acquaintance, Fiora said, which was true in its way. And you fell in love? He said it with the specific arch tone of someone who didn't quite believe it, but was curious to see how the story would be told. Things are rarely that simple, she said. Indeed they aren't. Enzo glanced toward Nero with something that might have been humour and might have been something sharper. My cousin doesn't do anything simply. No, Fiora agreed, looking at Nero across the table. He was watching her with those level, dark eyes, and an expression she was learning, slowly, to read. This one was closest to what she might have called appreciation, the very specific appreciation of someone who has watched a thing done well. I don't think he does. After dinner, while the men moved to the study with their digestivi and their business, Concetta guided Fiora to a smaller sitting room with the decisiveness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The room was warm, lamplight falling softly over comfortable chairs and small framed photographs on the walls. Concetta poured them both a grappa without asking, and sat down and looked at Fiora with those sharp, assessing eyes. He has told you nothing about what he is doing, the old woman said. Not a question. Fiora met her eyes. He has told me what he has chosen to tell me. That is very diplomatic. I am trying to be accurate. Concetta was quiet for a moment. Then, he is a good man, she said. I want you to know that, because there are very few people who know it. People see the name, the position, and they see one thing. Nero is... She paused, choosing her words with care. Complicated. He carries weight that he should not have to carry alone.
That has made him hard.
But the hardness is not the whole of him. She looked into her grappa glass. Be patient with him. He is not used to trusting people. Neither am I, Fiora said. Concetta looked up. Something in her old face shifted. Recognition, perhaps. The specific recognition of someone who sees their own experience mirrored in someone unexpected. No, she said. I suppose you are not. She raised her glass. Then perhaps you suit each other better than either of you knows. The wedding was held on a Saturday in November in the private chapel on the grounds of the Falcone estate. 22 guests, no press, no photographs beyond what the family photographer took, and those under strict control. 2 priests, because apparently one was not sufficient for a Falcone family event. The chapel itself was extraordinary. Old stone, a ceiling painted in the 17th century, narrow stained glass windows that scattered coloured light across the floor like a benediction that had been broken into pieces. Fiora wore ivory, not white. She had been very specific about this with the dressmaker her mother had arranged. Ivory. A silk so heavy it moved like water. A neckline that was modest and structured. Long sleeves because November was cold, and also because she wanted fabric between herself and whatever this day required of her. She walked in on her father's arm. Don Carmine Esposito, who had spent 50 years in the Cosa Nostra without once, to her knowledge, showing sentiment in public, looked at his daughter in her ivory dress and pressed his lips together and said nothing. She felt his arm trembling slightly under her hand and understood that this was the closest he would come to an apology. She forgave him. In the same breath she registered the trembling. Some things you do not choose. You simply discover they have already happened. Nero was standing at the altar. He had not turned when the doors opened. He stood with his back to the room, head slightly bowed, and for a moment Fiora wondered if he was praying, and then she came close enough to see the set of his shoulders and understood that he was simply being very still, composing himself, in the particular way of someone who manages composure the way she managed difficult surgeries, through absolute concentration, through the deliberate narrowing of attention to the next immediate thing. He turned when she was 3 steps away. His face was composed. His eyes, though, she was getting better at his eyes, held something she had not seen in them before, something raw and carefully controlled, like a flame behind glass. She came to stand beside him. The ceremony was in Latin and Italian, and the priest's voice rose and fell in the candle-lit air of the chapel, and somewhere behind her she could hear her mother trying not to cry, and Concetta not crying at all, and the particular silence of 22 people watching something they were not entirely sure they understood. When Nero slid the ring onto her finger, a band of dark gold, understated, exactly what she would have chosen for herself, his hands were absolutely steady. She noted this the way she noted a patient's steadiness under a needle, with professional respect and the private understanding of how much it cost. When the priest said the words, she said hers. When Nero said his voice was low and unhurried and perfectly even, and she looked at his face and found him already looking at hers, with that dark, particular attention, and the vows fell between them like something that meant more than either of them had fully consented to yet. The priest said to kiss the bride. Nero turned to her. He put one hand against her jaw, not roughly, not possessively, with a kind of careful deliberateness, like someone who was exactly aware of what they were touching. He tilted her face very slightly upward. His eyes held hers for one suspended second. Then he kissed her. It was brief, controlled, a kiss that was intended to be witnessed and nothing more. But his thumb moved just once against her cheekbone, in a gesture so small and unconscious that she was almost certain he didn't know he'd done it. She felt it for hours afterward. The reception was in the main house, in the great dining room that could, at full capacity, accommodate 40. The evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations she navigated on professional autopilot, her face arranged in an expression that communicated happiness without specifying its source. She drank one glass of champagne and then switched to water, because this was not an evening for loosening edges. Nero was at her side for most of it, not hovering, never hovering, but present. Close enough that when someone spoke to her about her work, about her plans, about where she and Nero had met, he was there to absorb the conversational pressure if she needed it. She found, to her surprise, that she didn't. She was better at this kind of performance than she'd thought. What surprised her more was that he seemed to know when she needed a moment away from it. Twice over the course of the evening he found some reason to steer them both toward a quieter corner, here to look at a painting, there to speak to Concetta, and only later, reviewing the evening in the privacy of her head, did she recognize that both times had been exactly when she'd felt the performance beginning to strain. He noticed things. That was becoming clear. At 11 o'clock, when the last guests were leaving, Nero guided her with a hand at her back through the diminishing crowd and up the main stairs. On the landing, he stopped and looked at her. "You're in the east wing," he said. "Second room on the left. Luca has your things from your apartment." "Not all my things," she said. "I'm keeping the apartment." "I know." He paused. "As per the agreement." They stood on the landing, the sounds of the reception drifting up from below, and looked at each other with the strange, particular awkwardness of two people who were legally married and had kissed once, and were still, in every meaningful sense, strangers. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him. "For what?" "For today. For—" He seemed to choose his words carefully, which she was coming to understand was habitual. He did not speak without consideration. "For doing this well." "I always do things well," she said. It was meant to be dry, a small joke, but something in his face changed when she said it, a fractional shift, like light moving across stone. "Yes," he said, and his voice had dropped slightly, taken on a quality she couldn't quite identify. "I know." She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed in its cream and silver linens, still in her ivory dress, her wedding shoes still on her feet, and pressed her palms flat against her thighs, and breathed. Outside the window, the grounds of the Falcone estate stretched away into the dark, the garden, the cypress trees, the walls, and beyond them the hills and the city sleeping in its lights. She was inside those walls now, legally, formally, on paper and in the sight of the church and the Cosa Nostra and everyone who mattered in that particular equation. She reached up and unclipped her earrings, her grandmother's earrings, and held them in her palm. "Be careful," Julia had said. She pressed the small gold studs gently in her hand and thought, for the second time, that being careful was probably insufficient to what this situation was going to require. They fell into a routine with the practical efficiency of two people who were separately very organized and had tacitly decided that organization was the safest framework for cohabitation. Fiora maintained her apartment, but spent 4 nights a week at the estate, as agreed. She left for the hospital at 7 in the morning. She returned in the evenings to the East Wing suite that she had already, in ways she found slightly alarming, begun to think of as her room. The books she'd brought arranged on the bedside table, a photograph of her parents and Marco and her on the windowsill, her running shoes by the door. She saw Nero at breakfast when their schedules overlapped, and at dinner on the evenings she was at the estate. Occasionally in the corridors, passing each other with the slightly charged awareness of two people occupying the same space by choice and by necessity, and still negotiating what that meant. He was an early riser. She discovered this because she was also an early riser, and their first kitchen overlap, 5:45 on a Wednesday morning, both of them converging on the coffee machine in the professional kitchen that was her favourite part of the house, had the quality of a minor collision. "Sorry," she said, stepping back. "Don't apologise," he said. He moved around her with the unhurried precision of someone who was comfortable in this kitchen, reached past her for the coffee and began making it in the particular way she had now watched twice and recognised as his method. Specific, consistent, a small ritual. He made enough for two without asking. "You're up early," she said. "I work in the mornings." He handed her a cup. "Before everything else starts." "What does everything else include?" A pause that was a breath too long. "Management," he said, which told her nothing and everything. She took her coffee and sat at the kitchen island, and he stood at the counter, and they drank in a silence that was, she realised with some surprise, not uncomfortable. She was a person who required silence in the mornings, who had always found the social demand of early morning conversation an imposition. The fact that he apparently required the same thing created an unexpected commonality. "What time is your first case?" he asked after a few minutes. 7:30. Cholecystectomy. Should be straightforward, unless the imaging lied to me. Does imaging lie often? Often enough to keep it interesting. She wrapped her hands around her cup. What about you? Calls with our people in Milan at 8. Legal meeting after that. He turned to look at her, leaning against the counter, and she noticed that he looked different in the mornings than he did in the evenings, less armoured somehow. His hair not yet carefully arranged, the dark eyes carrying the particular quality of someone whose defences weren't fully deployed yet. "You don't ask about the specifics," he observed. "Should I?" "Most people do." "I'm not most people." She met his eyes over her coffee cup, "And I suspect the specifics of your Milan calls are not information I need to have." Something moved behind his gaze. That same flicker she kept seeing and not quite identifying. "No," he said, "they're not." "Good, then we understand each other." A very slight pull at his mouth, not a smile. She hadn't seen him actually smile yet, she realised, but something adjacent, a direction his face wanted to go. She left for the hospital at 6:50 and spent the drive allowing herself, in the privacy of the car, to be honest about what was happening to her. Not the marriage, not the arrangement, the simpler, more inconvenient thing. She was becoming curious about him. Not in the way she had been curious the night she was first brought to the estate, when curiosity had been a tool for self-protection. A different kind of curiosity. The kind that pulled in the direction of another person, not to assess threat, but to understand something. The kind that noticed how he made coffee and remembered details of her morning routines and produced a slightly different quality of silence at 5:45 in the kitchen than he did in the library or at the dinner table. She was a scientist. She recognized the beginning of a pattern when it started appearing. She scrubbed into surgery at 7:25 and gave herself entirely to the cholecystectomy, which was not, in the end, entirely straightforward. There was scarring that the imaging had underrepresented, and a procedure that was supposed to take 40 minutes took 95. And when she came out, she was tired and precisely focused in the way she only was after a hard case. Her phone showed 3 missed calls, 2 from the hospital administration, 1 from an unknown number that wasn't Nero's number. She called back the unknown number while still in the scrub room. It rang once. "Dr. Esposito?" A man's voice, not one she knew. "My name is Inspector Ferraro. I'm with the Anti-Mafia Directorate. I'd like to speak with you, if you have a moment." The air in the scrub room was cold and antiseptic. Fiora stood very still. "I have a great many moments," she said carefully. "What would you like to speak about?" "Your husband," the inspector said, "and his activities. We believe you may be in a position to help us, Dr. Esposito. We understand this is a delicate situation." She looked at the wall of the scrub room, at the tile grout and the rack of surgical instruments, at the mundane hospital smell reality of the world she had built for herself. "I'll need you to come through proper channels," she said. "I don't respond to calls from unknown numbers about sensitive matters." "Of course," said Inspector Ferraro pleasantly. "That's entirely understandable. We'll be in touch." The line went dead. Fiora stood in the scrub room for 30 seconds. Then she took off her gloves, dropped them in the bin, washed her hands again, a habit, a reflex, the small physical ritual of transition between one state and another, and went to her next case. She did not call Nero. But that evening, at dinner, she looked at him across the table and thought about what Concetta had said. "He is a good man." And about Inspector Ferraro's careful voice, and about the fact that she was now, legally and publicly and in the sight of God and the Cosa Nostra, connected to this man in a way that meant the Anti-Mafia Directorate finding her number was not a coincidence. She ate her sea bass and drank her wine and said nothing. She would need more information before she could know what to do. That was always the truth of a difficult diagnosis. You observed first. You did not act on incomplete data. She observed. She found the room by accident. 3 weeks into the arrangement, a Friday evening when she had come to the estate after a late shift and the house was quiet. Luca had told her Nero was home, but the east wing lights were all dark, and she had assumed he was working in the study. She had gone looking for a book. The library had become, without deliberate intention, her favourite room in the house. It smelled right, that particular combination of old paper and wood smoke and the cold, clean air from the balcony doors, and the books were extraordinary, in 5 languages, and whoever had organised them had done so with intelligence and personal taste rather than mere display. She took a wrong turn coming back from the kitchen, or she thought she did. The corridor she found herself in was narrower than the main halls, lit by a single lamp, and at the end of it was a door she hadn't seen before, partly open. She heard his voice before she saw him, low, steady, in English. His English was flawless, American accented, which she had noted before and filed under the category of things about him that didn't quite fit the expected profile. He was talking rapidly, with an intensity at odds with his usual measured pace. She stopped. She could hear him clearly now. He was on the phone. The door was open enough that she could see the corner of a desk, a lamp, papers spread across a surface. "Timeline needs to move up," he was saying. "If we wait until February, the window closes. The commission meeting is the vulnerability. Once Lombardi presents his expansion proposal, the others will back it, and the moment is gone." A pause. Then, I know the risk. I'm telling you the alternative is worse." Another pause. Longer. "Yes, the Esposito connection is solid. It gives us cover on the Palermo side." His voice was tighter now, the control still there, but stretched thinner. "Are the documents ready? Everything that was discussed in Catanzaro?" A pause. "Good. When this is over," she stepped back. One deliberate step. Her foot did not make a sound, but he stopped speaking. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then his voice, quieter now and aimed, she understood instantly, directly at her. "I'll call you back." The phone call ended. She heard him stand, heard his footsteps cross the room. He came to the doorway. They looked at each other. She had her book pressed against her chest, her expression composedly neutral, not guilty, not afraid, simply present. A woman who had taken a wrong turn. He searched her face with his dark eyes in the way she was coming to recognize as his default mode of intelligence. Rapid, thorough, processing. "I got turned around," she said. "The East Wing is the other direction," he said. "I know. I found a wrong corridor." He stepped back from the doorway, not quite inviting her in, but no longer blocking the space either. She could see the room more clearly now. It was smaller than the library, more functional. A large desk covered in documents, a laptop, 2 screens. Bookshelves holding files rather than novels. On one wall, a large map of Sicily. On another, a board, the kind with strings and photographs and printed documents that she had time to glance at before she recognized she was not supposed to be seeing it, and looked away. "I heard part of your call," she said. It was a deliberate choice to say it, to put it between them honestly, rather than carry it alone. "Not intentionally. I'll pretend I didn't." His jaw moved very slightly. "What did you hear?" "Enough to understand that whatever you are doing is not what your family thinks you are doing." She met his eyes steadily. "And not what Inspector Ferraro of the Anti-Mafia Directorate thinks you are doing either." The change in his face was extraordinary, and it happened so fast and was so perfectly controlled that she could only see it because she had been watching very carefully for the last 3 weeks. A flash of something she could only call alarm, followed immediately by iron composure. "Ferraro called you," he said, flat, not a question. "3 weeks ago. I didn't respond." "You didn't tell me." "No," she said. "I was waiting to understand the context." He was very still. She could almost see him thinking. The rapid, precise calculation of someone assessing a situation from all angles simultaneously. Then he stepped back from the doorway fully and said, with the controlled care of someone making a significant decision, "Come in." She did. She sat in the chair across from his desk and set her book on her knees and looked at him. He sat down, slowly, put his elbows on the desk, steepled his hands in front of his mouth. The silence was long. "I am working with the DIA," he said finally. "The Direzione Investigativa Antimafia. Have been for 4 years. I am not what this family appears to be, or I am dismantling what this family has been from within. And I will tell you no more than that, because every detail you know is a danger to you." Fiora looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the documents, the map, the board with its strings and photographs, the voice she had overheard, the window closes, the commission meeting, the Esposito connection is solid. She thought about what it meant to live inside a fiction that complete for years, with such precision that even your own family believed it. She thought about what it cost. "The Esposito connection," she said. "That's what this marriage is." His eyes didn't flinch. "Among other things?" "Among other things." She absorbed this. "So I am your cover story. You are my wife," he said, and his voice had a roughness in it she hadn't heard before. "Whatever else this is, that part I take seriously." She sat with that for a moment. She was a person who believed in accuracy, in naming things correctly. This was a thing that would need to be named correctly. "All right," she said. "Then let me be clear about what I require." She folded her hands on her book. "I will not compromise my practice. I will not put my patients in danger. If at any point what you are doing puts someone in my hospital at risk, that supersedes everything else. Do you understand that?" "Yes. And I expect honesty." "Not everything. I understand why you can't tell me everything. But no lies. Silence when necessary. Never lies." He looked at her for a long, steady moment. "You're not afraid?" he said. "I'm terrified," she corrected him. "But I manage that internally. It doesn't affect my decisions." Something happened in his face then, a shift that was more significant than any she had seen before, something opening, very slightly, in the iron composure. Something that looked, she thought, almost like being seen by someone for the first time in a long time. "All right," he said. "No lies." She picked up her book and stood. "Good night, Nero." It was the first time she had used his name without his surname. She didn't do it consciously, it simply came out that way. She didn't look back at him as she left the room, but she heard him, very quietly, say, "Good night, Fiora." November became December in the particular way of Mediterranean winters, not with drama, but with a slow cooling, the light going golden, and then amber, and then thin, the hills above Palermo softening to grey-green, the city pulling its collar up. Fiora's life had developed a rhythm she hadn't anticipated, the mornings with their coffee and early silences, the hospital days that were entirely her own, the evenings at the estate that had begun, in small increments, to resemble something other than an arrangement, and something approaching, she was careful with the word, coexistence. She told Nero about difficult cases the way she might have told anyone she was coming to trust, briefly, technically, stripped of unnecessary detail. He listened with the quality of attention she was growing accustomed to, absolute, focused, no performance of interest, simply interest itself. He asked questions that were intelligent and not intrusive. He remembered what she told him, referenced it later, in ways that indicated he had been genuinely paying attention. He, in turn, told her things. Small things. The kind of things that would have been difficult to falsify, even if he were that kind of man. That he had spent 2 years in America, at Columbia, studying law, before his father's death changed his trajectory. That he had a habit of reading until 2 in the morning that he had inherited from his mother. That Dante, his younger brother, was the only person in his life he had ever told the complete truth, and that even that had complicated consequences.
"He knows?"
she asked one evening, in the library, where she was reading and he was working at the secondary desk he had quietly installed there at some point. She had come downstairs one morning to find it, and asked no questions about it. "He knows some of it," Nero said, without looking up from his papers. "He knows I am not what I appear to be. He does not know the extent." A pause. "He is trying to figure out which side of an eventual line he will stand on." "And what will you do if he chooses the wrong side?" A long silence. "I don't know," he said. It was the first thing he had said to her with no calculation in it at all, raw and unguarded, and she thought that cost him something. She returned to her book and said nothing more. What she was finding, against all her intentions, was that Nero Falcone in domestic proximity was a different entity than Nero Falcone in any formal context. The composure was the same. She didn't think it ever fully left him. She thought it might be structural, part of how he was built. But within it, there were things she hadn't expected. A dry, barely visible humour. Opinions about books, strong ones, which he expressed with the brevity of someone who had long since stopped expecting anyone to debate them. A habit of standing at the balcony doors in the evening, looking down at the city, that she recognized as the same impulse that made her stand at windows in the hospital. The need to see the larger context, to locate yourself within it. She recognized herself in these things, and recognition was dangerous. The Falcone Christmas party was on the 15th of December. 40 guests, the house decked in what she could only call restrained magnificence. No tinsel, no excess, just dark greenery and white candles, and the smell of wood smoke and warming wine. Fiora wore dark green, her hair down, the burgundy lipstick she reserved for occasions where she needed colour as armour. She was standing near the fire, talking to Concetta, when she felt, before she saw, that something had changed in the room. Concetta's eyes moved first, a practiced, involuntary assessment, and then Fiora turned. A woman had arrived. She was perhaps Fiora's age, beautiful in the particular way that registers immediately and then refuses to leave. Dark eyes, a mouth that curved upward at the corners even in repose, and an ease with the room that came from having been in it before, many times. She was looking at Nero. He, Fiora noted, with the same composure she brought to all difficult observations, was looking back, not with warmth, not with coldness, with the specific, closed quality of someone who has decided how a particular situation will be handled and is executing that decision. "Elena Lombardi," Concetta said quietly, close to Fiora's ear, "the daughter of the Naples family. There was," a slight pause, "a history before you." Fiora kept her face entirely neutral. How much of a history? "Enough that she came to this party," Concetta said, which was a complete answer. Elena Lombardi worked her way across the room with the social fluency of someone who had been navigating these gatherings since childhood. She stopped to speak to the uncles, to Enzo, to two men whose names Fiora didn't know. Then she reached Nero. Fiora watched from the fireplace. She watched him receive Elena Lombardi's greeting with courtesy and control. She watched Elena say something close to his ear, and she watched Nero's face not change in the slightest, not even when Elena's hand rested on his arm. She watched him answer whatever he answered, and she watched Elena's smile thin very slightly before recovering. And she watched after that as Nero looked across the room directly at her, not scanning, directly, as if he had known exactly where she was. He said something brief to Elena and then crossed the room. Through groups of people, past conversations that slowed as he moved through them, toward the fireplace, toward her. He came to stand beside her and said without preamble, "Have you met Elena Lombardi?" "Not yet," Fiora said. "She's the daughter of the Lombardi family." He took a glass from a passing tray, handed it to her, took one for himself. "Her father holds the Naples territory. We have a complicated history." "So I heard." She sipped. "Do you want to tell me about it?" "Not particularly," he said. Then, "She believed we were going to marry, before my uncle's health changed the situation." Fiora looked at the fire, looked at him. "And you?" A pause that was precisely as long as it needed to be. "I was willing to consider it," he said, "for strategic reasons. I was never—" He stopped. The precision was visible, the care with which he was choosing words. "It was never what it appeared to be." And what did it appear to be? He looked at her then, directly, with that dark, specific attention. "She was in love with me," he said simply. "I was not in love with her." The honesty of it, delivered so flatly, was somehow more affecting than elaboration would have been. She turned back to the fire. "I see," she said. "She will try to speak to you privately this evening," he said. "I'm telling you this so you're not taken by surprise." "I appreciate that." She did. She genuinely did. "What should I know about her?" "She is intelligent, and she is angry, and she is very good at making other people feel insecure." He said this without judgment, as pure information. "Don't let her." Fiora looked at him with something approaching amusement. "I have delivered terminal diagnoses and held the hands of people while they died and operated for 12 consecutive hours on 2 hours of sleep," she said. "Elena Lombardi will not make me feel insecure." His eyes moved over her face, that private, fractional shift of expression she was learning to track. "No," he said, and his voice had gone slightly different, a shade lower and less careful. "She won't." They stood together at the fire for a few minutes, in a silence that felt, for the first time, like a shared thing, a small, warm space inside the performance, just the two of them. Then Elena Lombardi arrived at Fiora's other elbow with her beautiful smile and said, "You must be Fiora. I've heard so much about you." And Fiora smiled back, equally beautiful, equally composed, and said, "And I've heard so much about you," which was not, technically, a lie. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Fiora was at the estate, awake because she had been reviewing a difficult case from the previous day, sitting in the library with her notes and a cold cup of tea, when her phone lit up with Marco's number. She answered immediately. "Marco?" What she heard on the other end was not her brother's voice, but his breathing, which was wrong in a way she identified before she was fully conscious of identifying it. Too fast, too shallow, with a quality of wet underneath it that made her stand up and begin moving before she had made any decision to move. "Where are you?" she said. Calm. Absolute calm. "Fiora." His voice was barely there. I'm at the Via Libertà apartment. There's... Are you alone? Two of my people. They're both... A pause with something broken in it.
Fiora.
I'm coming. Stay on the phone. Keep breathing exactly the way you are. Don't move if you can avoid it. She was already out of the library and into the corridor. Nero was coming down the stairs as she reached them. He was still dressed. He had not been asleep either, apparently. And he took one look at her face and said nothing. "Marco," she said. "Shot. Via Libertà." He said, "Come on," and that was the whole conversation. They took his car. He drove. She kept Marco talking, assessing through his voice, his breathing, the coherence of his answers, trying to build a clinical picture from nothing but sound. 3 gunshot wounds, he thought. Chest, definitely. Maybe abdomen. He couldn't tell. One of his men was dead. The other was conscious and mobile and holding something against the chest wound that Marco could not identify. "Good," she said to Marco. "That's good. Pressure is good. 15 minutes. Fiora, 15 minutes. Nero drove the way she performed surgery, with total focused precision, no wasted movement, a path through the city that was fastest without being reckless. He said nothing. His hands were relaxed on the wheel, and his face was very still, and she understood, in some peripheral part of her brain, that he had done this kind of thing before, driven toward emergency, maintained composure when everything in his body was probably urging a different response. The Via Libertà apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that looked from the outside like any other. Nero pulled the car to the building entrance with the security guard's deference that told her he had been there before, and they took the stairs 2 at a time. The apartment had been, there was no other word, ambushed. The front room was a wreck of overturned furniture and broken glass, and the particular stillness of a space where violence has just occurred. One of Marco's men was on the floor near the door, very still. The other, young, early 20s, had Marco propped against the kitchen wall and was pressing a cloth, a shirt it looked like, hard against Marco's left side. "Move," Fiora said to the young man, not unkindly, and she was beside her brother, and her hands were where his were, and she was already working. Her medical bag was in the car. She had grabbed it without thinking when she'd run through the entrance hall, a reflex so deep it was practically spinal. She worked. Marco looked at her with eyes that were trying to be steady and weren't quite making it. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. "Be quiet. Is it bad?" Chest wound entered lateral. Angle suggests it cleared the lung. She was talking half to herself, half to him, the clinical narration she used in surgery when she needed to keep her own mind organized. "Exit wound clean. Abdominal gaze is superficial." She pressed hard, heard him flinch, catalogued the data. "You've been lucky tonight, Marco." "Lucky," he repeated. "Shut up. Breathe through your nose." Nero was behind her, She could feel him without looking. He had taken control of the room, spoken quietly to the young man who had been keeping Marco alive, established what had happened and who had done it, and where they were now. She did not listen to that conversation. She did her work. 40 minutes later, Marco Esposito was stable, sedated, and on his way in a private car to a facility Nero had called, not the university hospital, for reasons Fiora understood and did not question. A private clinic with surgeons she did not know personally, but whose credentials she had demanded and received via text before the car had travelled 3 blocks. She was in the kitchen of the Via Libertà apartment, washing her hands for the 3rd time, when Nero came in. He watched her at the sink. She could see him in the window's dark reflection, still and watchful, his jacket smudged at the sleeve with Marco's blood. "He'll be all right," she said. Her voice was steady. She was good at steady. "Because of you." Yes. No false modesty tonight. Tonight she had done what she trained for, and her brother was alive, and she would not minimize that. She dried her hands and turned around and leaned against the sink. She was trembling. It wasn't visible. She had controlled the visible part, but it was there, deep in her muscle, the adrenaline aftermath of 2 hours of crisis management. She breathed through it. Nero crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her, close, closer than he had ever been in any moment that wasn't the performance of their wedding ceremony. He reached out and put one hand over hers, where they gripped the edge of the sink. His hand was warm, large. It stilled the trembling in her right hand, without pressing, without gripping. "You're shaking," he said. "Delayed response," she said. "It's normal. I know." He didn't move his hand. "Who did this?" she asked. The question she had been not asking for 2 hours. "I'll know by morning." "And then what?" His eyes met hers. There was something in them she had not seen before. Something colder and more fundamental than the usual controlled calculation. Something that was not, she realized with clarity, anger. It was older than anger. It was the thing that came before anger was necessary. Certainty. "Then it will be handled," he said. She looked at his face for a long moment. At the man who was her husband, her cover story, her unknowing morning companion and her silent co-resident, and the person who had driven through Palermo at 2 a.m. without being asked, and had moved through a violent room like someone who had been trained, or had trained himself, for exactly this. "I don't want to know what handled means," she said. "No," he agreed, "you don't." She looked down at his hand over hers, at the contrast of warmth against the cold edge of the sink. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." "Did you think I wouldn't?" She met his eyes. "I didn't think about it. I just started moving." "So did I," he said. They stayed like that for a moment longer, his hand over hers in a kitchen that smelled of blood and antiseptic and the particular awful quiet of aftermath. And she thought about the word handled, and about what it meant to be married to a man who was simultaneously dismantling the world that had just tried to kill her brother, and what it meant that she felt, in this moment, not afraid of him, but something else entirely. Something she was not ready to name. She did not go back to the estate that night. She stayed at the clinic until Marco was out of surgery at 5 a.m, and the surgeon, competent, she had satisfied herself of that,
gave her the post-op report with the particular tone of medical professionals recognizing each other. Marco would be fine. The chest wound was clean. 2 weeks of recovery, and he would be irritating her again. She told her mother at 5:15 in a phone call she dreaded and executed. Her mother cried. Fiora absorbed it, made practical statements about timeline and recovery, and disconnected the call feeling simultaneously deeply sad and completely exhausted. She found Nero waiting outside the clinic. He was leaning against the car in the pre-dawn chill, coat collar up, hands in pockets. He looked up when she pushed through the clinic door, and something in his face settled, a tension she hadn't seen clearly until it released. "He's fine," she said. Nero breathed out. It was barely audible, but it was there. She walked to the car, and he opened the door, and they drove back to the estate in silence that was not the easy morning silence of their kitchen routines, but something heavier and more significant. Silence with substance in it, with the weight of the night. They ate breakfast in the kitchen. He made eggs. She sat at the island and drank coffee and watched him cook with the unself-conscious competence of someone who has fed himself for a long time alone. She thought about his years in America, in Milan, the years of running operations and maintaining the fiction and being precisely what no one suspected. "Who shot him?" she asked. She had waited until now, until the food was in front of them, until the most acute part of the night had passed. He sat across from her, set down his fork. "The Amato faction," he said, "allies of the Lombardi family." Why Marco specifically? A message. His voice was very level. "To me. They know the Esposito marriage is significant. They're testing whether I'll respond and how." She absorbed this. She ate a bite of egg. "And will you?" "Yes." "What does that mean?" "It means a response will be made." He met her eyes. "One that does not involve further violence toward anyone's family." A pause. "But one that will be understood." She looked at him carefully. The morning light through the kitchen windows was pale and silver, and in it he looked tired, she realized. It was the first time she had seen tiredness on him, and it made him look different, more human, more contained in the way things look when they're carrying what they can carry, and not much more. "You're working against the DIA's timeline," she said. He looked up. "If you respond visibly," she said, "it changes your profile. It changes what they're expecting from you. It may compromise whatever you've been building." She held his gaze. "I'm right." He was still for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "you're right." "So you can't respond the way you would normally respond?" "No." "And you can't explain to the Falcone family why you're not responding the way they would expect?" "No." "And Dante is watching." His face was very still. "Yes." She thought about this. She ate her eggs. Outside, the estate gardens were grey and still in the early morning, frost on the grass, the cypress trees dark against the pale sky. "I want to understand something," she said, "about what you're actually doing. Not the details. I don't need the details. The shape of it." He considered her for a long moment. Then he got up and refilled their coffee cups and sat back down and said simply, "There is a commission. 5 families. They meet 4 times a year, and what they decide controls everything. Criminal enterprises, political corruption, economic structures in 3 regions of Italy. The aim is to dismantle the commission, not arrest one family, not strike one operation. Take it apart at the foundation."
That requires being inside it long enough to know everything it is and everyone it involves. He stopped. That is the shape of it. She listened to all of this very carefully. And the marriage? My credibility within the commission required a demonstration of commitment to Palermo. A marriage to a Sicilian family, an old name, a significant alliance, was part of what established that I was not a disruption, but a continuation. He met her eyes. Your father's debt to Lombardy was real. The protection I offered was real. The rest is complicated, she said. Yes. She sat with this. She thought about what it meant to have been, for weeks, so completely accurate in her assessment of this man, the intelligence, the control, the weight he carried, and also to have been missing the largest piece of it. She thought about how she felt about that. I'm not angry, she said, which surprised her even as she said it. I should be. You used me. Yes, he said, but you also... She searched for the word. You were honest when I asked directly. You kept the agreement. You came when Marco needed... She stopped. That is not a transaction, he said, and his voice was rougher than she had heard it. Your family's safety is not something I did for cover. I want you to understand that. She looked at him. Why? He met her eyes. Something in his face, the iron composure, the magnificent controlled surface, cracked very slightly, like light through stone that has fractured along an old line. Because you're in this with me now, he said, whether that was planned or not. And the people in my life, he stopped. I don't have very many, but the ones I do. He didn't finish the sentence. She understood it anyway. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, the same gesture he had made last night in the kitchen of the Via Libertà apartment, the same unconscious returning of warmth. She felt him go still under her hand. All right, she said quietly. Then tell me what you need from me. Not for cover. For this. The silence was long, and the pale morning light moved through the kitchen window, and something shifted between them, incremental and irreversible, the way tectonic things shift, not with drama, but with a pressure that builds along hidden fault lines until the landscape is permanently different. Time, he said finally. I need time. And I need you to... He looked at her hand on his, then at her face. Stay. It was the simplest word he had ever said to her. It was also, she understood, the most honest. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Elena Lombardi arrived at the estate uninvited on a Tuesday. Fiora was home unusually early, a surgical slot that had opened and closed again, a rare, empty afternoon, which he had spent trying and failing to read, and actually thinking about the conversation in the kitchen 3 days ago, and what the word stay had felt like in the air between them. She heard the car arrive. She looked out from the library balcony and recognized Elena's car from the Christmas party, a red Alfa Romeo, the colour of a very deliberate choice. She considered remaining in the library. Then she put down her book and went downstairs. Elena was in the entrance hall when Fiora came down, Luca hovering at a diplomatic distance, with the expression of a man exercising profound professional restraint. She was beautiful in the afternoon light, dark coat, dark eyes, and the particular carriage of someone who has decided they have rights in a place they no longer have rights in. "Elena," Fiora said. Elena turned. Her smile was perfectly calibrated, warm on the surface, with a precision underneath it that Fiora recognized because she used something similar in difficult patient consultations. "Fiora, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." She descended the last step. "Nero isn't here, I'm afraid." "I know," Elena said. "I came to see you." They looked at each other for a moment. Fiora could feel Luca hovering. She said, "Come through," and led Elena to the smaller sitting room, not the library, which was hers, not the formal drawing room, which was too much of a stage. The comfortable middle room. She offered tea. Elena accepted. They sat. "I'll say what I came to say," Elena began, "because I think you're a person who prefers directness." "I am," Fiora agreed. "Nero and I—" She stopped, took a breath that cost her something. "What was between us was real, on my side. I want you to know that I know the difference between what he felt and what I felt, and I'm not here to claim something that isn't there." She met Fiora's eyes. Her own were very direct, and Fiora could see in them the intelligence and the hurt and the considerable effort it was taking to have this conversation at all. "I came because I need to know if he's safe." Fiora was very still. "What do you mean?" she said carefully. Elena looked at her for a long moment. "My father has been talking about Nero differently for the past 3 months, she said. "There's something, a plan, I think, that involves the commission and the Falcone position. I don't know the details. I was not told the details." Something bitter crossed her beautiful face. Women in this world are never told the details, as I'm sure you've noticed. But I've grown up in it. I can hear the shape of things. She paused. "And the shape of what my father is planning involves Nero being in a very dangerous position." Fiora set down her tea carefully. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I still—" Elena stopped, looked at her hands. "Because whatever he is to me now, I do not want him hurt." She looked up. "And because I think you are someone who can do something about it, if you know." Fiora held the woman's gaze for a long moment. She thought about what she could say, what she should say. She thought about Nero's voice, "The commission meeting is the vulnerability," and the board in the room she wasn't supposed to have seen. She thought about February and timelines and the Amato faction and Marco's blood on white tile. "What specifically did you hear?" she said. Elena leaned forward, told her. It took 12 minutes. When she was done, Fiora sat quietly for a moment, processing. Then she said, "Thank you." Elena stood. "For whatever it's worth," she said, "you seem good for him. He looked at you differently at the Christmas party." Something that might have been the predecessor of a smile crossed her face, brief and painful. "He never looked at me the way he looked at you." "Elena, don't," she said. Not unkindly. "Just don't let him get killed. He's annoyingly difficult to hate." She picked up her bag. Fiora walked her out. At the front door, Elena stopped and said, without turning, "Be careful of Dante. I don't know what side he's on. I don't think he knows either." Then she was gone, the red Alfa Romeo pulling out through the cypress-lined drive, and Fiora stood in the doorway of the Falcone estate, with the pale afternoon sun on her face,
and the knowledge that whatever shape things had taken 3 days ago in the kitchen, they were moving faster now. She called Nero. He answered on the second ring. "Fiora, you need to come home," she said. "We need to talk." A pause. She could hear him reading her tone, processing, recalibrating. "How soon?" "Now," she said. "Please." "I'll be there in 30 minutes. He was there in 20. He sat across from her in the library and listened. She told him everything Elena had said, and she told it the way she gave surgical reports, sequentially, clearly, with the details that were relevant and none that weren't. When she was done, the fire had burned lower and the room was darker, and Nero was sitting very still in the chair across from her, with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped. "She's right about the commission meeting," he said. His voice was very level. The February date was something only a small group knew. Elena must have... He stopped. His jaw was tight. Her father trusts her with more than he realizes. "She came here to warn you." "She came here to warn you," he corrected. "There's a difference. She came because she understands that you are now the relevant person." He looked up at her. "That is its own kind of signal." "What do you mean?" "She came to you," he said, "because even Elena Lombardi, who knows me better than most, has recognized that you—" He stopped, restarted. "That you have a stake in this." She watched his face carefully. "And do I?" The question landed between them. He held her gaze, and something, a very significant something, moved across his expression. "Yes," he said quietly. "I believe you do." She did not look away from him. She said, "Tell me what Elena's information changes." He ran a hand through his hair. The first time she had seen him make that kind of uncontrolled gesture. "The commission meeting is in 3 weeks, not February. They moved it." He stood, moved to the window, looked out at the dark garden. "The DIA expected February. They have a protocol for February. If the meeting is happening now, then the timing of whatever response they were planning is wrong." "Yes." He turned. "I need to reach my contact. Tonight. We need to revise the protocol." "Can you do that safely?" "Mostly." A very slight pause that she had learned to pay attention to. "There is one complication." She waited. "Dante knows I have a contact within the DIA," he said. "He doesn't know who. He has been," he chose his word carefully, "circling for the past month. I think someone in the commission has suggested to him that I am not what I appear." "Someone told Dante you're an informant?" "Yes." "Who?" "The likeliest candidate is Enzo." His face was very still when he said his cousin's name. "Enzo has always resented my position. He is ambitious and not particularly patient. If someone from the commission wanted to destabilize me from within, they would have approached Enzo first." She thought about Enzo at the family dinner, the practiced charm, the slightly assessing eyes, the way he had watched Nero throughout the evening. She had filed it and forgotten it. Now she retrieved it. "What does Dante do if he believes it?" she said. "That is the question." He came back to his chair and sat, and looked at her with the expression of a man who has been running calculations for a very long time and has reached a point where they will not run further without additional data. "Dante is complicated. He grew up watching me walk away from what this family was. He interpreted it as betrayal for years. But he also... There is a part of him that has always known this world would kill him,
And I think some part of him has wanted the exit I represent, if there is one. Then he might not expose you. He might not, he agreed. Or he might. And I won't know which until it's too late. She thought about Dante at the family dinner. The two empty chairs, the watchful, dark eyes, the barely contained restlessness. He is trying to figure out which side of a line he will stand on. Nero had said that weeks ago. "Let me talk to him," she said. Nero looked at her sharply. "No." "I'm the least compromised person in this situation," she said, and her voice was very steady. "I'm not DIA. I'm not Cosa Nostra. I'm a doctor who married into this because of her family, which is exactly what everyone believes. If I approach Dante as myself, not as your intermediary but as myself, he has no framework to distrust it. It's too dangerous. Less dangerous than him becoming a liability." She held his gaze. "He doesn't know what I know. He doesn't know what I know about you. I can talk to him honestly about what this family has cost, what the violence has cost. I've seen it. I lived it last week in a clinic at 4 in the morning. That's not performance, that's true." Nero was looking at her with an expression she had no word for. The iron surface was not gone exactly, but transparent in a way it hadn't been. She could see through it, just barely, to the thing underneath. Something that was neither the controlled professional nor the quiet morning companion, but something between, something that was simply him. "You trust me," she said. "You said no lies. This is me, in return." A long silence. "All right," he said. She breathed. "But not alone," he added. "I will know where you are, and if anything feels wrong, I'll leave." She met his eyes. "I'm not reckless." "No." He looked at her. "You're the least reckless person I have ever met." The way he said it was not quite a compliment, and not quite something else, something that sat in the space between description and admission, and she felt it as a specific, warm pressure somewhere in the centre of her chest. She got up. "I'll reach out to Dante tomorrow," she said. "Fiora?" She stopped. He was still seated, looking up at her. His voice, when he said her name, had a quality she was only beginning to understand. The way a word sounds when the person saying it is fighting not to say something more significant. "Be careful." She thought of Julia saying the same thing months ago with an entirely different meaning. "I always am," she said. She found him at a bar in the old city, in the narrow streets near the Balaro market, where the 16th century architecture crowded close and the smell of the market lingered in the cold air, even in the evening. He was there because she had asked, and he had come, which she took as its own kind of answer. Dante Falcone was sitting at a corner table with a glass of something dark, and he looked up when she walked in with the particular wariness of someone who has agreed to a meeting and spent the intervening time reconsidering. She sat down across from him, ordered water, let the silence sit for a moment. "You didn't tell him you were coming here," Dante said. "I did, actually." Something flickered in his face. Surprise recalibrated quickly. "He let you?" "He doesn't let or not let me do things," she said. "I told him my plan, and he disagreed, and then he agreed." She met his dark eyes, so much like his brother's, and so unlike them at the same time. "He trusts me." Dante looked at her for a long moment. "Why should he?" "I don't know," she said honestly. But he does, and I think you know things about your brother that you don't know how to carry alone. A silence. He turned his glass on the table. What do you want from me? Nothing tactical, she said. I'm not here for information or to protect anything specific. I'm here. She thought about how to say this accurately. I'm here because I became part of this family under circumstances I didn't fully choose, and the person I'm married to is in danger, and the one variable I can't calculate is you. He looked up at that. I'm a surgeon, she said. I remove uncertainty where I can. You are uncertainty. What do you think you know? He said. I know your brother has been working against the commission for 4 years. I know someone told you to suspect him. I know you haven't acted on it, which means you're still deciding. I know... She paused. I know that if you expose him, he will die. Not be arrested, not be prosecuted, die. And I think you know that too. The bar was warm and low lit. Around them, ordinary life, couples, groups of friends, a television showing football. Dante's jaw tightened. He looked down at his glass. He left me behind, he said. It came out quieter than she expected, underneath the guard. When he went to America, when he started, whatever this is he's been building. He never said a word to me. No, she agreed. He didn't. I'm his brother. Yes, and you were 16 when he left, and 17 when your father died, and he believed that protecting you meant keeping you at a distance. She said it simply, without apology or softening. I'm not defending it. I'm naming it. He made a choice that he thought kept you safe, and the cost of that choice is that you grew up in a family that would have killed him if they'd known what he was, and you didn't know either. Dante was very still. He needs you to choose, she said. He won't ask you. He doesn't ask for things. But the timeline is now, not in February. And if you're going to stand against him, it needs to happen before the commission meeting. And if you're going to... She stopped. He needs his brother. He has nobody. He has you, Dante said. He has me 3 weeks into a marriage he arranged for strategic reasons. She said it without bitterness. What he has in me is provisional, still forming. What he could have in you is something that doesn't require footnotes. The silence stretched. Dante looked at his hands. He had his brother's hands, she noticed, the same structure, the same steadiness. What happens, he said slowly, after, if he does this, dismantles the commission? I don't know, she said honestly. Neither does he exactly. But the family's legitimate businesses are real. There's real value there. What comes after, I think, is... She searched for the word. Possibility. He lifted his glass and drank, set it down, looked at her with Nero's eyes and something in them that was different from Nero. Younger, rawer, less controlled, but underneath it, the same bedrock thing. You love him, Dante said. The word hit her with the specific force of something she had been not thinking for several weeks. She looked at Dante Falcone across a bar table in the old city of Palermo and heard the word love and felt it land and sat very still with it. I don't know, she said. I think I might. Something shifted in his face. He almost smiled. He's impossible, he said. He makes coffee before I ask. Every morning. She heard herself say it. He remembers things. He listens, really listens. She stopped. He's not what anyone thinks he is. No, Dante said softly. He's not. He sat back. I'm not going to the commission. I want you to know that. I decided before tonight. He looked at his hands. I needed someone to tell me he needed me. He wouldn't say it himself. No, she agreed. He wouldn't. Tell him... He stopped, reconsidered. Tell him I know where he keeps the marsala. A small, complicated smile. He'll understand. She looked at Dante Falcone for a moment and thought about the two brothers in this city, carrying separate halves of the same inheritance, and felt something in her heart that she was only now finding words for. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, just... He met her eyes. Keep him alive. That, she said, is something I actually know how to do. She came home and told him. He listened to everything, standing in the library doorway, and when she was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then, he said the marsala. He did. The expression that crossed Nero's face was unlike any she had seen on him before, something that broke through the composure, the way sunlight breaks through specific cloud formations, sudden, complete, illuminating. He pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling, and she understood, with a clarity that felt like hands finding a pulse, that the thing cracking open in his face was not what she'd have named emotion, so much as relief at a level too old and deep to be located in any recent event. He remembered, Nero said, quietly. What? When we were young, he looked at her. The old Don, our grandfather, had a particular bottle of marsala he kept for significant occasions. When our father died, Dante was... He couldn't stop crying. He was 17, terrible with grief. I found the bottle, and we drank half of it on the kitchen floor, and I told him... He stopped. I told him that some things end, but the people who know where the marsala is kept, those people are still standing. Something moved in his face. It was ridiculous. He threw a potato at me, but he stopped crying. She looked at him, at the cracked, open, unguarded thing his face was doing, and felt herself calibrating, not for distance, not for protection, but for proximity. He's still standing, she said. Yes, he breathed. He is. He looked at her with a question in his eyes that was the most unguarded thing she had seen from him yet. How did you know what to say to him? I didn't, she admitted. I said what was true. That's usually the thing that works, in my experience. She paused. That, and sometimes it helps to tell people what they already know, but can't hear from themselves. He looked at her for a long time. The library was warm, the fire low, the room full of books, and the particular quiet of late evening when everything that needed to happen today had happened, and tomorrow hadn't started yet. The commission meeting, she said. When, exactly? 3 weeks and 2 days from now. He came to his chair and sat. I spoke to my contact tonight. The revised protocol is in place. But... He ran a hand over his face. The tiredness she'd seen after Marco's shooting was back, deeper. There is risk. The kind of risk that can't be managed entirely. She sat across from him. Tell me. My position requires me to be present at the meeting. When the arrests begin, I am... He said the word like it cost him. Exposed. visibly associated with the outcome. The Commission will understand immediately what I am, what I've been.
And they'll want to respond.
Yes.
To you, specifically.
To me, he said, and to anyone connected to me. His eyes met hers directly, which is why I need you to go to your apartment that evening, not the estate, your own building, the security there. I've already spoken to— No, she said. He stopped.
I'm not going to my apartment, she said.
I'm not going to sit in my apartment while you're at a commission meeting being whatever you're being exposed as. That's not— She heard the words she was about to say and let them happen. That is not something I'm willing to do. Fiora, I understand the risk. I am a person who calculates risk professionally. I am telling you that the risk to me is less significant than— She stopped, started again. Nero. I have not spent the last 4 months becoming someone who sits in an apartment, waiting. He looked at her with that quality of attention she had, somewhere in the last few weeks, stopped trying to calibrate for safety and simply allowed herself to be seen by. What has 4 months made you? He asked, very quietly. She thought about this, about the mornings, about the library. About 2 in the morning and her brother's breathing on the phone. About Elena in the sitting room and Dante in the bar and the marriage certificate in a drawer somewhere and the ring that she had, she realized, completely stopped noticing as a foreign thing on her hand. Someone who has a stake, she said, his words from before. She saw him recognize them. I can't let you. You don't let or not let me, she said, with something close to warmth. You trust me. You said so. She met his eyes. Trust me now. The silence between them changed. She felt it shift, felt the whole tenor of the room alter, felt him looking at her with something that had finally stopped being controlled. Fiora, he said. Her name. Just her name. In a voice she hadn't heard from him before, stripped of everything but the fact of saying it. I know, she said, because she did. He stood up and crossed to her, 2 steps, no more, the geography of the room small enough that they had never been very far apart, and he cupped her face in his hands with the same deliberateness she had felt once before, at the altar, but utterly different in character. Different because there was no one watching, different because his hands were not quite steady. She felt the slight tremor in his hands and thought, this is the truest thing I have seen from him. He kissed her. Not briefly, not for performance, not controlled. She kissed him back, and the library was very quiet, and the fire had burned to embers, and somewhere in the city below the hills of Palermo, everything was 3 weeks from breaking open, and in this room, right now, she had her hands in his coat lapels, and she could feel his heartbeat, and she thought, this is what I would choose if choosing was simple. Stay, she said. He pressed his forehead to hers. I'm not going anywhere, he said, and she heard her own words reflected back at her with a meaning that had grown considerably since she'd first said them. The 3 weeks before the commission meeting were the most ordinary and the most charged of Fiora's life. She worked, she operated. She had a patient, a 42-year-old schoolteacher from the Capo district, with a bowel obstruction that revealed under the knife a complication no one had anticipated, who required 9 hours of surgery, and who Fiora sat with in the ICU afterward until 5 in the morning, not because protocol required it, but because the woman had no family in the city, and Fiora had the specific compulsion of someone who does not abandon what they have begun. She came home from that shift as the sun was rising, and found Nero in the kitchen, and he looked at her, grey-faced, still in yesterday's clothes, and said nothing, only made her tea and eggs, and sat with her while she ate in silence. And she thought, this is the thing they don't tell you about. That love, the actual thing, the bone-deep version, announces itself not in grand gestures, but in small acts of witness, in someone who makes eggs at 6 in the morning without asking. She had decided, somewhere in the week after the library, to stop treating the word like a controlled substance to be rationed. She loved him. She had probably loved him for longer than she understood, in the way that things you've been resisting have already become true before you stop resisting them. She didn't say it. Not yet. Some things needed the right moment, and the right moment was not 3 weeks before a DIA operation that might kill him. Dante came to the estate twice that week. The first time, he and Nero talked behind closed doors for 2 hours, while Fiora performed a very convincing act of reading in the library and thought about nothing else. The second time, he joined them for dinner, and the 3 of them sat at one end of the long table and ate lamb and drank wine, and Dante told a story about Nero at 17 that Nero refused to confirm or deny, and Fiora watched the 2 brothers exist in the same space with a kind of cautious, tentative warmth that looked like something being rebuilt from its own rubble. She felt the rightness of it as a physical sensation. Inspector Ferraro called again. This time she answered. She said clearly and without elaboration, "I have nothing to say to you. What happens or doesn't happen is not something I will be discussing with this office. If you have evidence of specific crimes, I trust you will act on them through appropriate channels." A long pause. Then, "We're aware of your husband's cooperation, Doctor Esposito. I want you to know that our office intends to honor all agreements made with—" "I trust that you will," she said. "Good day," she told Nero. He looked at her with that look, the one she now recognized as the expression he used when she did something that he found both unexpected and exactly right. "You didn't ask me first," he said. "I handled a situation that required handling," she said. "I didn't compromise anything you've built. I simply made clear that I am not a resource." "Yes," he said. "That was—" He stopped. "That was very precise." "I'm a precise person." "You are," he said, and the look didn't change, and she held it until she felt heat in her face, and looked away, and heard him make a sound that was, possibly, probably, maybe the first time she had ever heard him actually laugh. Very quiet, but unmistakable. She filed it away, the sound of him laughing, soft and private, in the kitchen of the estate. She filed it alongside the sound of him saying, "Stay," and the feeling of his hands not quite steady on her face. She was building a collection, she realized. An interior archive of moments that mattered. She found she wanted more of them. The night before the commission meeting, she could not sleep. She lay in the bed in the East Wing suite, which had been, since the night in the library, less exclusively hers, a fact that had accrued in the way of all domestic facts, incrementally and without announcement. And she stared at the ceiling in the dark, and went through the protocols he had told her as simply as he could. The DIA would move at midnight. He would be removed from the room and moved to a secure location before anyone had time to respond. The arrests would be simultaneous. 5 families, 37 individuals. By morning, the commission would be structurally destroyed. That was the plan. She knew, with the part of her that had learned to know things about this world, that plans did not always execute precisely. He was awake beside her. She could feel it in the particular quality of his stillness, the stillness of controlled wakefulness, not sleep. She turned toward him. In the dark, she couldn't see his face clearly, but she could feel the warmth of him and the tension in his body that was nothing like his usual controlled stillness. "Tell me something true," she said, quietly. He was silent for a moment. Then, "I didn't expect you." Expected what, instead? Someone manageable. Someone who would exist at a safe distance. Play a role. She thought about what she had been 4 months ago, standing on a terrace with her arms crossed, telling a man she had just met that she preferred to stand. "I don't do safe distances very well," she said. "No." She could hear the warmth in his voice, that particular quality that had come to live there. "You don't." A pause. "I was afraid of you," he said. "In the beginning, I was afraid of what you would see if you looked closely enough." "And now?" His hand found hers in the dark. "Now I think what you see is the only thing I've been sure of in 4 years." She pressed his hand. "You're going to be all right tomorrow," she said. She said it with the same conviction she used when she told a patient they would survive a surgery. The conviction born not of certainty, because certainty was never available, but of the absolute decision to act as if the best outcome were true. "I know," he said. "Do you?" "I do now." She lay in the dark and listened to him breathe, and matched her breathing to his, and thought about all the ways things could go wrong tomorrow, and then, deliberately, set that thinking aside. She was good at this. The choice not to fear until fear was necessary. The conservation of emotional energy for when it was needed. "Nero," she said. "Yes." She said it, quietly, into the dark, with no preamble and no qualification, because she was a person who believed in naming things correctly. "I love you." The silence that followed was very long. Then he pulled her close with both arms and pressed his mouth against her temple, and she felt the thing in him that had been held at arm's length from everything dissolve, completely and without resistance, into the simple fact of holding her. "Fiora," he said into her hair, just her name. But the way he said it was the whole answer. The day passed slowly. She operated in the morning, a scheduled case she had refused to cancel because her patients could not be subsidiary to this, and came home in the afternoon to find the estate quieter than usual, the ordinary staff reduced, Luca moving through the rooms with the particular efficiency of someone who has been told to make things ready and is not asking questions. Dante arrived at 6. He sat with her in the library, the two of them, while Nero dressed for the commission dinner. Because it was a dinner, apparently. The commission always began with dinner, like a terrible formal meal before a terrible formal proceeding. "He knows what he's doing," Dante said, which told her he was as afraid as she was. "Yes," she agreed, which was not agreement about being unafraid, but agreement about the fact. "He's been doing it for 4 years without getting killed." "That's true." And he doesn't take unnecessary risks. You know that. I know that. She looked at her hands. Dante, I'm not trying to talk either of us out of being afraid. We're allowed to be afraid. She searched for it. I need to sit somewhere and be afraid quietly, instead of somewhere alone. He looked at her for a moment. Thank you, he said, for what you did in the bar. I said what was true. You said what I needed to hear. That's different and harder. He picked up his glass of water, set it down. He's lucky, he said, to have you. He's infuriating, she said. He makes unilateral decisions and he communicates in approximately 12% of the words required for full transmission of meaning, and he once spent 20 minutes rearranging the books on my bedside table without asking, because they were bothering him. Dante blinked. Then he laughed. A real laugh, brief and bright, very like his brother's and entirely different. Nero appeared in the doorway at 7:15. He was in black, the precise, impeccable tailoring of a man who understood that presentation was information. He looked at Fiora and then at Dante, and something moved between the three of them, a shared knowledge of what this evening was, waited and acknowledged, and then set down. Don't wait up, he said. The lightness in his voice was deliberate, and they both heard the effort in it. Don't tell me what to do, Fiora said. His mouth did the thing that wasn't quite a smile. He crossed to her, lifted her hand. He pressed his mouth to her knuckles, not a performance, just a thing he did, quietly and privately, with his eyes on hers. I'll be back before morning, he said. She held his gaze. I know, she said, and she said it with all the conviction she had. He left. The evening was very long. She and Dante ate dinner neither of them wanted, left most of it, talked about things neither of them were thinking about. Medicine, his degree in economics that he had never used, a bar in Naples he had liked, a restaurant in this city they both knew. Surface conversation, with a depth beneath it that neither of them acknowledged, because acknowledging it would mean sitting in the fear directly, and the fear was enormous. At 10 o'clock her phone lit up. Nero's number. Her heart contracted. She answered. Yes. Everything is in position. His voice was low and very level. In approximately 2 hours, you'll be able to hear things happening in the city. Don't worry about sounds. It will be loud, and then it will stop, and it will be over. Where are you? At the dinner. In a bathroom, briefly. Something in his voice that she recognized as the specific composure of someone who is putting it on for her benefit. I wanted to call before... He stopped, started again. I wanted to hear your voice. She closed her eyes. I'm here, she said. I know. A pause. If something... Don't, she said. Fiora, don't say if something, she said. Come home, and then you can say everything you want to say in person. Her voice was very steady. She was very proud of how steady it was. Do you understand? A beat. Then, yes. Good, she breathed. I love you. I love you, he said. Simply, directly, with no hesitation, in the bathroom of a restaurant where 37 people were about to be arrested, and his 4 years of careful fiction was about to become truth. I love you, Fiora. I will come home. The line disconnected. Dante was looking at her across the table. His face was very still. "He said it," Dante said. "Yes. He never says that." His voice was rough. "I have been his brother my entire life, and I have never heard him say—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "He loves you." "I know," she said. They waited. At 12 minutes past midnight, they heard it. Distantly, from the city below, the sound of vehicles, and then voices raised, controlled chaos, the sound of a large, coordinated action, the sound of an organized world, fracturing along pre-cut lines. It lasted 47 minutes. Then it stopped. At 2:19 in the morning, a car came through the estate gates. Fiora was on the front steps. Nero got out. He was still in his black dinner clothes. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there when he left, small, already clotting, but there, and he was moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who might be injured and has not yet assessed the full extent. He looked across the courtyard at her, and something in his face, in the fall of light from the estate windows, was different. Younger, she thought, or more accurately, less old. She walked to him. She put both hands on his face and turned his head to look at the cut properly, and he let her, perfectly still, his hands coming up to grip her wrists, not restraining, just holding. "It's minor," she said. "Yes." "Are you hurt anywhere else?" "My ribs, possibly." "Enzo." He stopped. Enzo was not on the list. He found out. There was a... He exhaled. "Brief disagreement." "Let me look." "Inside," he said, and his voice, carefully controlled all evening, was at last fraying at the edges, the way things fray after too long under pressure. "Please, inside." She brought him inside. She looked at his ribs, bruised, not broken, and cleaned the cut and closed it with steri-strips while he sat at the kitchen island where they had drunk their morning coffee in his ruined dinner clothes, and watched her work with the expression of someone who has returned from a very long journey to a place they weren't sure they'd see again. "It's over?" she said. "The commission is over," he said. "The arrests are complete, the agreements hold." He watched her hands. "It will take months, years before the structure's fully, but the commission is over." "Yes." "And Enzo?" A pause. "Arrested." His face was very still. Dante didn't go to the commission," she said. "He came here and sat with me and ate dinner, and we talked about a restaurant in Naples." Something extraordinary happened in his face. The fullness of relief, enormous and slow, like a tide coming in. "He came here," Nero said. "He came home," Fiora said. In the days that followed, Palermo was a different city. Not visibly, not in the ways a tourist would notice, not in the surface of things. The market still operated, the churches still held their services. The sea was the same colour it had always been, and the light in the afternoons still fell golden over the old city. And the cats that lived in the ruins near the Norman palace still conducted their ancient territorial business with complete indifference to human events. But in the structures beneath, in the specific architecture of power, who called whom, who answered, who sat at which table, and what was said there, something fundamental had changed. The commission was 37 people short, and the power that had moved through it was now moving through a vacuum, and vacuums in this world were not comfortable things. Nero was at the estate and not at the estate, present physically, absent in all the ways that mattered, immersed in the aftermath of what he had helped create. There were calls at all hours, men in expensive cars who came and sat with him in the study for an hour and left without acknowledging Fiora's existence. A lawyer who arrived on Tuesday and did not leave until Thursday. The DIA handlers who came formally now, in daylight, with documentation, which was different from the years of midnight phone calls and careful encryptions. She gave him the space he needed and went to work, and operated, and came home and made dinner, and sat with Dante sometimes when Dante needed somewhere to be that wasn't his own apartment, and wasn't the weight of what the family was reconstituting into. The three of them found, in those weeks, an equilibrium, not discussed, not planned, simply occurred the way genuine things occur when the conditions are right. She heard from her father that the Lombardy debt was dissolved, that Marco's territory was, apparently, no longer under threat, that the Esposito family name, in the new configuration of things, carried something it had not carried before. Don Carmine said none of this explicitly. He said it in the way he spoke about the garden, the weather, his health, the careful indirections of a man who does not know how to thank someone directly. She understood. She forgave him, finally, fully, in the way you forgive things when you can see the larger context of them. Marco called from the clinic where he was finishing his recovery, sounding like himself again, irritating, warm, completely unreformed. "Tell your husband I owe him," he said. "Tell him yourself," she said. "I don't know how to talk to him." "He makes coffee at 5:45 in the morning," she said. "Start there." Marco came to the estate on a Sunday. He and Nero sat in the kitchen for an hour and a half, while Fiora deliberately absented herself, and when she came back downstairs she found them at the kitchen island with coffee and a demolished plate of sfincione, talking about, of all possible things, football. Marco's face had a quality she hadn't seen on it in years, the quality of someone who is not afraid of the room they're in. She went to stand at the kitchen doorway and watched her brother talk, animated, gesticulating, and her husband listen with the specific quality of attention she knew now as his truest mode, completely present, not performing interest, but genuinely interested. And she thought, this is what after looks like. This particular configuration of people, in this particular kitchen, in this particular light. She filed it, added it to the archive. Inspector Ferraro called once more on a Wednesday, and this time she answered pleasantly. He wanted, in the careful language of bureaucratic necessity, to express the Directorate's appreciation for the Falcone family's cooperation and to confirm that the terms of all agreements were in full effect. "I'm sure my husband will be gratified to hear that," she said. "I'll tell him." A pause, then, slightly more humanly, "Dr. Esposito, are you—" He searched for the word. "Well?" She considered. "I'm very well," she said, and meant it in a way she could not have predicted 4 months ago, standing on her father's terrace with her arms crossed, looking at a man who had already read her file. She went back to her patients. She had a patient, the school teacher from the Capo district, recovered now, stitched back together, coming in for a follow-up, who grabbed her hand when Fiora came in and said, "You stayed with me. My husband told me. You stayed until morning." "You were my patient," Fiora said. "It was where I needed to be." The woman held her hand and looked at her with the frank, exhausted gratitude of someone who has been on the wrong side of survival and made it back. "God sent you," she said. Fiora thought about this on the drive home, about the particular privilege of her work, to be the person someone needed in the worst moment, to use what she knew in service of keeping people alive. She had spent years trying to build enough distance between herself and this world, this family, these entanglements, to practice medicine cleanly. And what she had found instead was that the distance was not the thing that made her a good doctor. Presence was. The willingness to stay, to not look away, to put your hands into the complicated and find the thing that could be saved. She came home to the estate in the late afternoon, and the light was already going golden, and from the front steps she could see the whole valley below, and the city in the declining day, and the sea beyond it, the Mediterranean blue-grey and immense. Nero was on the balcony off the library. She saw him from the courtyard, his figure against the sky, standing as she had seen him stand before, looking at the city. She went upstairs and through the library and out to the balcony and stood beside him. He reached over and took her hand without looking, without ceremony, with the ease of something that has become natural. She looked at the city with him, at the light on the old stone and the church domes and the market stalls beginning to fold for the evening, and the sea beyond all of it, permanent and indifferent and beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Tomorrow," he said, "for the first time in 4 years." She tightened her hand in his. "What's tomorrow?" she said. He looked at her. His face in the late light was, she searched for the right word and found it, open. Simply, completely open, the way a room looks when all the windows are finally unlocked and the air has been let in. "Whatever we make it," he said. 6 months after the commission meeting, on a Tuesday morning in June, Fiora was eating breakfast alone in the kitchen. Nero was in Milan for the week, which was a new development of the legitimate operations he was actively expanding, when she found the document. She hadn't been looking for it. She had been looking for the emergency contact form she was supposed to have submitted to the hospital 2 weeks ago and had been mislaying persistently. She found the document in the left side drawer of the kitchen island, where she'd been looking for a pen, tucked under a map and a set of keys she didn't recognize. It was the prenuptial agreement. Their prenuptial agreement. She stood in the kitchen with morning light coming through the windows and looked at the paper and turned to the page she had read 3 times the first time, the page titled Duration and Dissolution, and she read it again. The marriage will be reviewed at the 3-year mark by mutual consent. 3 years from their wedding date was 7 months away. She set the paper down on the counter and poured herself more coffee and looked at it. She had not thought about the clause in months. She had filed it when it became clear that the thing she was living was not what the clause anticipated, and had not retrieved it. Now she stood in the kitchen of a house she had come to inhabit fully, in the city she had always loved, married to a man she loved without reservation, and had told so repeatedly in the months since November, and she looked at a clause that gave both of them an exit in 7 months. She called him. He answered on the first ring. "Fiora, is everything's fine," she said. "I found our prenuptial agreement." A pause. "Why were you looking for it?" "I wasn't. I was looking for a pen." She looked at the paper. "Nero, the 3-year clause." Silence. Then, "Yes." "Do you want to invoke it?" "No." His voice was immediate, flat, absolute, zero calculation in it at all. No, Fiora, I don't want to invoke it. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I want to revise it, he said. The agreement, the whole thing. I've been thinking about it for months. I want... He stopped. In Milan, in whatever room he was in, she could hear him breathing, and the specific quality of that silence was one she knew now as his particular way of choosing words for things that mattered.
I want to renegotiate. New terms. Terms that don't have an exit written in. She looked out the kitchen window at the garden, at the June morning, at the ordinary, extraordinary beauty of the estate and the valley beyond, and the city she had grown up adjacent to, and come back to, and found, in the most unexpected way, a life inside of. Come home first, she said. We can negotiate when you're home. I'll be back Thursday. Thursday, then. Fiora. His voice did the thing it did with her name. Yes? I love you, he said. I wanted to say it while I was thinking about it. She smiled, the kind of smile she was alone for, the private, unguarded kind. You can say it in person on Thursday. I know. I wanted to say it now, too. Nero, she said. Yes? Drive safely on the way home, and answer your emails from the hospital. They've been trying to reach you about the pediatric wing donation since Tuesday. A pause. Then, softly, the pediatric wing. You thought I hadn't noticed where the monthly deposit was going. She set her hand on the counter, palm flat, the gold band on her fourth finger bright in the morning light. You're not as subtle as you think. I'm usually very subtle. With most things. Not with this. She paused. It's a good thing to do, Nero. You told me in the beginning that you were going to redirect the money. I did. I thought a beat. I wanted to do something useful with it, instead of... He didn't finish the sentence, but she heard it. Instead of everything else the family's money has funded. She understood. She stood in the kitchen with the prenuptial agreement on the counter and the morning light coming through the windows, and the man who had arranged a marriage and become her husband and dismantled a criminal organization from within and quietly funded a children's hospital ward. And she thought, this is who he was when no one was looking. Come home, she said. Thursday. Thursday, he confirmed. Then, don't let Dante near the kitchen. He burned the fennel last time. He burned it once. He burned it deliberately. He claims otherwise, but I've seen his face when he cooks fennel. She laughed. The easy, unguarded laugh she had found, gradually and then all at once, available in this house. Goodbye, Nero. Goodbye, Fiora. She hung up. She folded the prenuptial agreement and set it neatly in the drawer where she'd found it, with a pen on top of it so she could find it again on Thursday when they would sit down and change the terms. She finished her coffee. She put on her jacket. She was in the car on the way to the hospital when it occurred to her that she was happy. Not dramatically happy, not the happiness of event or revelation, the quiet, structural happiness of someone who is in the right life. She sat with that, quietly, all the way to work. November came again, 1 year from the wedding. She was sitting in the garden on a Sunday morning, the late autumn light very pale, her coffee on the stone table beside her, reading the journal she had started sometime in January, a habit she had resisted for years because she'd believed she didn't have the patience for it, and had discovered she had simply been reserving it for a life worth recording. Nero came out from the house with 2 more cups and a plate with 2 cornetti on it, and she moved her legs off the extra chair to let him sit. He sat. He ate one cornetto. He looked at the garden with the morning expression she knew as his truest face. Not the controlled professional, not the managed public composure, but this one. Quiet, attentive, present. "Marco called," he said. "He wants to come for the anniversary dinner." "He wants to eat Luca's cooking," she said. "Yes, probably. Shall I tell him yes?" "Tell him yes. Tell him to bring someone if he has someone. He's been vague about that." Nero looked at her, a slight lift of his brow. "He mentioned a woman in his last call," she said. "I'm choosing to be optimistic." "You're a romantic," he said. "I'm a pragmatist who has discovered that romance and pragmatism are not mutually exclusive." His mouth curved, a full smile. She had them now, had been collecting them for a year, each one catalogued. This one was her second favourite, the one he used when she said something that surprised him and delighted him in equal measure. "Dante will come," she said. "Yes. And Concetta, if her hip is better. She'll come even if it isn't. She has views about attendance at significant occasions. She has views about everything." "She does. They're usually correct." Fiora looked at him across the garden table and thought about the first time she had sat across a table from him, in the library, with the fire and the city lights and the particular charged quality of two strangers beginning a very complicated negotiation. She thought about how she had kept her arms crossed and her voice level, and told herself that the cold feeling in her chest was strategy, not longing. She had been wrong, it turned out, or partially wrong. The strategy had been real. The longing had also been real. Both things, simultaneously, which she had been slow to admit, because it was difficult to be simultaneously strategic and in love, and she was a person who preferred not to do difficult things without full preparation. Full preparation for this particular difficulty, she understood now, was not something anyone offered. You arrived at it by already being inside it. The renegotiated prenuptial agreement was in a drawer in the study, signed and witnessed and changed. The 3-year clause replaced with language about the duration of the marriage as defined by both parties' ongoing consent, which was a legal way of saying we are staying unless both of us decide otherwise, which was a legal way of saying we are staying. She had a complicated relationship with the word staying. She had spent a large part of her adult life moving away from things, toward the clean distance of professional competence and personal independence, which were real values she retained and did not regret. But staying, in the sense of choosing to remain, actively, in the presence of something you love, that was different. That was its own kind of intelligence, its own kind of courage. She had learned it from him, partially. From watching him stay in a position for 4 years that required constant vigilance and cost him things she would never fully know the extent of. From watching him stay present in the mornings, in the library, in the kitchen, when staying was harder than absenting himself would have been. And from the school teacher from the Capo district, from Marco's clinic vigil, from Dante in a bar in the old city saying, "Keep him alive," with the voice of someone who had needed to be kept alive himself. Staying, she had decided, was not the passive thing. It was the most active thing. "Tell me something true," she said. Nero looked at her. It was their thing. She had said it first, months ago, in the dark before the commission meeting, and he had claimed it. They said it to each other now, when they wanted access to the thing underneath the ordinary. Like a password. Like a key. I'm afraid of how much I need this, he said, simply, without pretense. Afraid the way I was afraid of you at the beginning, for the same reason. She looked at him across the small stone table with the pale autumn light and the garden and the city below and the year they had built together behind them and everything ahead of them not yet known. Tell me something else true, she said. He reached across the table and took her hand, held it the way he held it now, without ceremony, without performance, with the ease of something that belongs. I am very glad, he said, that you preferred to stand. She laughed. She couldn't help it. The real laugh, the unguarded kind, that she had brought into being in this house and offered him willingly and would not take back. So am I, she said. The garden was quiet. The November light moved on the stone. Below, in the valley, Palermo was doing what Palermo always did, surviving, enduring, being beautiful and complicated, and entirely itself. She picked up her coffee with her free hand and her journal with the other, and began to write, and he sat beside her in the Sunday morning silence, reading whatever he was reading, and the cypress trees were dark and still against the sky, and the estate walls held them in their specific and particular warmth, and she wrote, Year 1, The Shape of Things. And then she stopped and looked at him reading, and thought, there are not enough pages. They went back to the chapel on the anniversary. Not for a ceremony, there was no second ceremony, no public marking, no performance for anyone else's benefit. They went in the early evening, before the dinner, the two of them only, walking from the estate through the garden in the last light, through the cypress trees and across the grounds to the old stone building at the edge of the property. The chapel was unlocked. It always was, Nero had told her, because his grandmother had insisted on it. God's house is always open, she had apparently said, with the absolute conviction of a woman who had lived long enough to know exactly which things were negotiable. Inside, it was cold and still and smelled of candle wax and old stone. The painted ceiling was the same, the stained glass was the same. The particular quality of the light, filtered and coloured and scattered across the floor, was the same. They sat in the front pew, not kneeling, not performing piety, just sitting, the way two people sit together in a quiet place. I keep thinking about what I would have said, Fiora said, if I'd known. At the altar. If I'd known what I know now. What would you have said? She thought about it. She was a person who believed in accuracy, who had always measured words against what she actually knew and refused to overclaim. She thought about what she knew now, the full knowledge, the 1 year of mornings and emergencies and negotiations and laughter and the particular texture of loving a person who is difficult and worth the difficulty. The same things, she said, but differently, with more intention. He turned his head to look at her. In the filtered light, his face was as it had been on the night she first came here, angular and serious and striking, and also entirely different, because she knew it now, knew the landscape of it, knew where the warmth lived, and where the old weight settled, and where, if you knew to look, the thing he called love was visible in him as a constant thing, structural, not decorative. I would have looked at you, she said, instead of past you. He was quiet for a moment. I looked at you, he said. I know. She remembered it, the quality of his attention at the altar, the dark eyes holding hers. I thought it was assessment. It was, he said. It was also He stopped. She waited. He rarely went back for words once he'd abandoned a sentence, but this time he did. It was the first time I had looked at someone and thought, "This is something I have not planned for." She absorbed this. Outside the chapel windows, the light was fading, the blue hour descending over the grounds. "And now?" she said. "Now," he said, "you are the only thing I have that I did not plan." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He brought his arm around her, and she felt the warmth of him, and the steadiness of him, and the specific comfort of someone who has become, without announcement, the person your body orients toward. "Tell me something true," she said, for the second time that day. She felt him think. "This is the most afraid I have ever been," he said. She lifted her head, looked at him. "Not of anything specific," he said. "Of losing this, now that I have it. The commission was easier in some ways. I knew what I was protecting. I knew the shape of the risk." He met her eyes. "This is different. The risk is larger because what I would lose is larger." She put her hand against his face, the deliberate, careful gesture she recognized from the altar returned to him. "The risk is large for me too," she said. "That's what love is. You know that." "I know it intellectually." "You know it completely," she said. "You're just afraid of knowing it completely." He turned his face into her hand slightly, an involuntary thing, the smallest surrender. "Tell me something true," he said, his turn. She thought about what was most true. "I had a patient a long time ago," she said. "First year of my fellowship. A man who had been in an accident, internal bleeding, very bad odds. We operated for 6 hours and we saved him." She paused. 3 days later, he was walking in the corridor, and he stopped me and he said, "Is this what after feels like? Because I thought it would feel different." And I didn't know what to say to him. I thought, you'll find out what after feels like when you've had enough time in it. She felt Nero listening, completely the way he listened. "What I know now," she said, "is that after doesn't feel different. It feels like the same life, with the fear removed." He was quiet for a moment, then, "And what replaces the fear?" She thought about the kitchen in the mornings, the coffee, the books, Dante burning fennel, Marco's laugh, the schoolteacher's hand in hers, the prenuptial agreement in a drawer, renegotiated. "This," she said, "all of this." He pressed his mouth to her temple, held it there. She felt him breathe. Outside the chapel, the estate grounds were darkening, the cypress trees going black against a sky that was still holding the last gold of the day. In the main house, Luca would be setting the dinner table. Marco would arrive in an hour, probably with someone, probably with the apologetic grin of someone who has brought an unannounced guest and is counting on his sister's good nature. Dante would arrive with Marsala because it had become his thing, the bottle of Marsala, his way of honouring a private language between brothers. Concetta, whose hip had recovered sufficiently, would arrive with opinions about the wine selection, and precisely one compliment, delivered so obliquely it could only be understood by people paying close attention. The whole complicated particular life they had made, accident and intention and love, and the specific Palamitan architecture of blood and loyalty and change, was waiting in the house on the hill. Fiora thought about the woman she had been a year ago, standing in a driveway in the October dark, with her arms crossed, telling a man she didn't know that she preferred to stand. building her small fortifications against a world she hadn't chosen. She did not regret those fortifications. They had made her careful, and careful had gotten her here. But here was not what she had been trying to build. Here was what she had found when she stopped running the calculation and simply stayed. She took Nero's hand. He looked at her. "Come on," she said. "They'll be arriving soon." He stood and helped her up, with the ease of someone who has been doing this for a year and expects to do it for many more. They walked to the chapel door and out into the November evening and through the garden, side by side, in the last light. The estate was warm and lit. From the front steps the valleys spread below them, the city, the sea, the sky still holding its last colour at the edge of the world. The whole enduring, beautiful, complicated thing. He held the door for her. She walked in. And the door closed behind them, and the house received them. And that was the truest thing of all, that they had built this together, out of calculation and compromise and accident and honesty and the stubborn particular refusal of two very controlled people to remain unaffected by each other. That was the whole story. That and the coffee at 5:45 in the morning, and the way he said her name, and all the rest of it, the ordinary miraculous rest, the after that doesn't feel different but is, because the fear is gone, and what remains is this: us, ours, here, permanent as stone, warm as light, true.